Bonjour tout le monde. Je prends le micro pour que les gens m'entendent donc à Québec. Bonjour les gens à l'Université Laval. There are also people at McGill University, so we're in 3 locations today. Je vais présenter notre présentateur en français parce qu'il est tout à fait bilingue. Donc, ça nous fait plaisir d'avoir aujourd'hui avec nous, pour un des derniers séminaires de l'année, Andrew Heisz, qui est donc chef à la division de la statistique du revenu à Statistique Canada, qui vient nous parler d'une enquête assez récente dont les données de la première vague sont maintenant disponibles pour les chercheurs. Et il me disait tantôt que la deuxième vague est justement en processus de collecte présentement. Donc, je lui laisse la parole pour nous présenter cette enquête fort intéressante et importante. C'est une des seules maintenant qui est en cours, qui est une enquête longitudinale, donc très intéressant pour les chercheurs. Merci, Andrew.
OK, merci. Merci à tout le monde pour m'inviter ici pour présenter le projet de Lisa ELIA aujourd'hui. Dans la plupart, je vais présenter aujourd'hui en anglais parce que c'est définitivement plus facile pour moi, particulièrement sur les termes. Je peux chatter un peu en français, mais les termes, j'ai des faiblesses de savoir tous les verbes et tous les noms. Alors, tu peux me poser des questions en français ou en anglais. Et aussi, tu peux m'interrompre quand vous voulez pour poser des questions. Probablement, vous n'êtes pas la seule personne avec la même question à cette point. Okay, so the idea here is to present to you this new project. I like to think about it as bigger than a survey because it has a lot of other things involved in it as well. We will start with that. Okay, I got the right button here. Good. Okay, so the Longitudinal International Study of Adults, l'étude longitudinale et internationale des adultes. It's a new Canadian longitudinal survey. Mention our sponsor. Our sponsor is Employment and Social Development Canada. That's the department that used to be known up until recently as Human Resources and Skills Development Canada. It was changed in the last budget, I believe. And of course, being from Statistics Canada, it's administered by Statistics Canada. I'll spend a bit of time talking about the overall purpose of the project and some of the details on the project. And I think the way I've organized my presentation is I'm hoping that it gives you an idea as researchers. If you were to sit down in the lab and take a start with the data, this presentation is designed to kind of inform you about what the data will look like when you get there. So I'll talk a little bit about what's in the data, how it's set up, what some of the design features of the survey are, what kinds of content you can expect to find there. And then I'll wrap up at the end with a brief discussion about the second wave of LISA, which is in the field right now. Okay, so as already mentioned, it's in the Research Data Center Network right now for the first cycle. This is a basic, very high-level representation of the different subject matter areas that are intended to be covered by LISA. Now, parce que c'est une étude longitudinale, c'est pas nécessaire à couvrir tous les sujets dans la première vague. On peut dérouler l'enquête et toucher quelques sujets dans la première vague, quelques autres sujets dans la deuxième vague, quelques autres sujets dans la troisième vague, avec l'idée d'accumuler l'information sur notre répondant au fil du temps. I hope I just said that over time. It's a tricky one. But the one central thing I think that will maintain over the entire survey is this idea that it's at its core, the survey is about work, earnings, retirement. So the labor market rests at its core. But we understand in this survey that the labor market is affected by lots of other things, right? Your labor market success or your ability to participate in the labor market is affected by your health or disability status. It's affected by what else is going on in your family. Obviously, skills, competence interact importantly with the labor market, and your education interacts importantly. So the idea is to try to understand through a survey what some of these complex linkages are. Okay, so it's fairly broad in its reach in terms of subject matter area coverage. And this doesn't even cover everything that's on it. So this is basically just a high level. And of course, these arrows can be thought of as being at a point in time. So we can look at the correlations between, say, just to pick a couple things, disability and retirement. Or you can look at it over time and look at the relationship between how, say, a health event at one period in time or becoming disabled at a certain period of time leads to later labor market outcomes. As for the sample, if you're familiar with some of the surveys like the Australian HILDA or the Understanding Society survey in the UK or the German Socioeconomic Panel in Germany, this survey has a similar design. And what's unique about this design is that we sample households, but then every member of that household is a permanent sample member for our survey. And that's different from most surveys, because most surveys select a household and then pick one person as a targeted respondent. But in our case, we choose all of the members to be sample members, and you can imagine some of the strengths that will give us over time as households split apart. We can see what different members are moving into in terms of their futures. To do that, of course, we have to interview every household member. So in LISA, we interview everybody who's the age of 15 or higher. We haven't interviewed anybody younger than 15. That's true in wave 1 and wave 2, but it's not necessarily always going to be true. When a member who was less than 15 in one cycle becomes 15 in a later cycle, so when they age into the sample, if you will, we'll start to interview them then. So in cycle 2, we have plenty of new respondents aged 15 and 16 who were not interviewed in the first cycle. And then, of course, the following rules are we intend to follow these sample members over time, and an interview would occur every 2 years. So it's biennial, with an interview occurring every 2 years, similar to how the NLSCY or YITS worked. I guess one other little feature here is that as we follow people over time, we're also interested in the context into which they move. So we also endeavor to interview any cohabitants that they move into, even those who are not part of what we call our permanent sample. So if a husband and wife split up and they move and establish 2 new households with 2 new partners, we would try to also interview those 2 new partners. Now, that's the overall vision of how the survey rolls out, but I haven't said that much about the specifics of the content. And that's where I'll start now. So there are 2 really important features of LISA, especially the LISA Wave 1 that make it quite unique. The first is that LISA Wave 1 entered the field along with something called the Programme for International Assessment of Adult Competencies. C'est le Programme pour l'évaluation internationale des compétences des adultes, or just called PIAAC or PEICA en français. The idea here was that the 2 surveys would economize somewhat on costs by using the same sample for 2 different functions. But the advantage of it is it means that what the PIAAC content is available for some LISA sample members. That's important because PIAAC was by and large an assessment of adult competencies. I'll go into that in more detail in a couple of slides, but the idea is this would make available for some LISA sample members an evaluation of their literacy, numeracy, and problem-solving skills that were evaluated in the PIAAC assessment using a fairly lengthy computer-based test. We think that that's a really good selling feature because it allows longitudinally for you to be able to see how these skills affect future outcomes. Une deuxième caractéristique importante de la première vague, et il inclut une, what would you call it, a stratégie de remplacement des données en utilisant les données administratives. In this project, we have added more administrative data to the survey than I'm aware of us doing in the past. It includes quite a bit of administrative data that will supplement use of what's available in the survey data. And I'll go into that in more detail in the next couple of slides as well. So as far as the collection results go, la première vague de collecte était passée entre novembre 2011 et juin 2012. Alors, cette période de collecte nous s'appelons LISA 2012. The overall household response rate to LISA was 72%. We end up with an enumerated sample of 32,000 individuals. And that includes a certain number of non-responding children, but they're enumerated, they're in our sample. And of the remaining sample eligible to be interviewed, we interviewed 89% of them. So you'll see when you use the data, if and when you use the data, that we have a fairly large sample, but some of them are children who don't respond to the survey itself, and some others are adults who we, for whatever reason, weren't able to interview. But we end up with a fairly decent-sized sample of 23,000, almost 24,000 individuals. By Statistics Canada standards, that's not a huge sample. It's about half the size of the sample that SLID was. But by international standards, in terms of some of the other surveys that I mentioned earlier that this survey is comparable to, it's on par, and it's much larger than some of them, and maybe a bit smaller than some others, but it's on par with the size of these types of projects internationally. For researchers that are interested in focusing on the PIAAC, on the respondents to the PIAAC interview, so utilizing these important skills assessments, there's about 8,600 respondents in Wave 1 that we have these skills assessment for. And splitting it across province, it's basically a proportional, not exactly proportional to province. Smaller provinces were slightly oversampled. Larger provinces were slightly undersampled. We end up with 11,500 households, and this represents the distribution across provinces. So people interested in doing provincial level studies would take that into account when designing their study. OK. Est-ce qu'il y a des questions maintenant? Non? Oui?
Je me demande les deux échantillons entre l'échantillon du PEICA puis l'échantillon de l'ISA, c'est à quel point elles sont différentes ou à quel point elles se chevauchent. Dans le fond, j'ai pas très bien saisi si tous les répondants du PIAAC, est-ce qu'ils sont dans l'ISA ou pas nécessairement?
Non, pas tous les répondants de PIAAC, parce que le PIAAC était tellement grand. Ça compris c'est 26 000 répondants, je pense, finalement. Et aussi, ça va prendre beaucoup d'argent pour suivre tous les répondants de PIAAC. Alors, nous avons sélectionné seulement une sous-partie de PIAAC. Ouais. Malheureusement aussi, pour votre intérêt, le PIAAC a sous-échantillé, oversampled, is that right? Les autochtones et les immigrants et les autres groupes spécifiques, mais le ELIA utilisait seulement un échantillon représentatif de Canada. Alors, les sous-échantillons ne fait pas partie de l'ISA. Oui, dans une représentation normale, 2-3% de notre échantillon est autochtone.
Y compris les réserves ou pas?
Non, pas les réserves, non. OK. Je vais procéder. Oh, ouais. OK, bon. In the LISA, there are 5 main parts. And I'll step through these in some detail because it'll give you a real flavor for what's in the Wave 1 data. So the collection instrument contains 5 parts. There's the household roster, the questionnaire component, the PIAAC component, the 2011 income component, and the historical administrative data component. So I'll go through those one at a time to explain to you what's in each of them. So the household roster is collected at the first contact with the household. It's a preliminary interview with one person in the household who's knowledgeable about everybody in the household, and it's really to get a sense of who lives there. And virtually all surveys from Statistics Canada do these things, so there's nothing terribly unusual about this. But the main thing that LISA does that's maybe a little bit different than some surveys is LISA takes the effort and the time to capture the relationships from everybody to everybody else. So we have a very clear representation of what the family structures are within the household. At the same time, we collect people's marital status, their age, and their gender. The second main component of LISA is the questionnaire component. Okay, so the questionnaire component is a survey component that's asked of each respondent. All right. Now, it's important to note that the questionnaire is tailored to the particular situation of each respondent. So not all respondents get all questions. In particular, it was important for us to manage the interview time that an interviewer would spend in the household. So we had to be very careful about how much time to put an interview in the household. And our constraint was made more binding by the fact that the PIAAC assessment itself could take upwards of 2 hours. So a respondent who is doing the PIAAC assessment would work with a laptop doing exercises for upwards of 2 hours to fulfill all of the different requirements for the PIAAC assessment. So what that means is that for the remainder of the household members, the interview is necessarily quite short. I guess where I would take that next is that that also means that the amount of information that we collected in the interview is somewhat limited. So you might not be totally excited by the content of the questionnaire component. It's basically some labor force stuff and some human capital background, etc. I say what it is exactly here. So your Aboriginal status, activity limitations, your labor market characteristics, educational attainment, health, language, and some history are collected through this questionnaire component of every respondent. The second important component is the PIAAC component. The PIAAC component is an OECD initiative to assess skills and competencies. When we talk about LISA and the I being international, this is the international part. So it's not to say that there's a similar survey now that's going longitudinally in another country. The international part was in the first wave, and it's the PIAAC assessment. So people now can do research with a public use microdata file from LISA, which is available from the OECD, and you can compare results across 26 countries. So I think probably there's some knowledge about that already among the people here. The PIAAC is, of course, intended to build upon previous initiatives. Those of you familiar with the Adult Literacy Survey and the Adult Literacy and Life Skills Survey, the PIAAC is intended to be comparable. The results of the PIAAC are intended to be comparable with those two. As I mentioned, at the center of the PIAAC is a series of computer or paper-based assessments. A respondent will go to paper if it turns out that they are unable to use a computer. So because it's a general population survey, we of course find some people that are completely unfamiliar with computers. And so they would do the assessment on paper. And so they do assessments in literacy, numeracy, and something called problem solving in a technology-rich environment, which starts off with simple things like how to manipulate a mouse, how to do basic functions on a computer, and then moves on to more and more complicated things regarding problem solving. In addition to the assessment component on the PIAAC, there's a survey component which examines skills used at work and everyday life. So the PIAAC component is asked only of those 8,600 PIAAC respondents that I mentioned, whereas the previous component, the questionnaire component, was asked of all respondents. For those of you who have worked with the Survey of Labor and Income Dynamics, you'll be familiar with this approach to using T1 income to replace questions on reference year income. So LISA does the same. So we retrieve selected income information from the sample members' 2011 T1 income tax return. So the idea here being to avoid having to ask the questions on people's income, as well as to economize on the length of the interview. we instead inform our respondents that we'll be using information from their tax return, and so that becomes available to us in this way. Now, I mentioned to you before that there are some adults for whom who are in the household, but we are unable to interview. And we're also aware that many researchers, and in fact, an objective of the project is to understand, say, well-being at the family or household level. And well-being is often measured by things like family income. So we have to have a method for imputing income for those who did not complete a LISA interview but are otherwise in our sample, and so we impute an income value for those individuals. Of course, that's quite the minority of cases where an imputed value is used, and for researchers, we include a flag to indicate that the response is imputed versus actually taken from tax data. And then the fifth component is the historical administrative data component. So what we've done here is we've taken a number of sources of administrative data, mostly ones right now that are related to labor and income, but others could be possible in the future, and combine them to LISA. And not only have we combined them with LISA in the reference year, like the 2011 one, example that I gave you a moment ago, we also, where the data was available, we also included past data of LISA respondents. So what we have included is in three parts. The first part is what we call T1 family file information, and it dates back to 1982. And the T1 family file, for those of you who are familiar with the Longitudinal Administrative Data Bank, the T1 family file is the master file for the Longitudinal Administrative Data Bank. It's a 100% sample of tax filers that have been grouped into families. So we have retrieved data from the T1 family file, and where we're able to find a match, we link it back to 1982, sort of as far as we can go. So this allows the computation of contemporary data on personal and family earnings, government transfers, income, and after-tax income. It allows for historical and personal family income. So we know for our respondents what their historical personal income and earnings and transfer receipt were, as well as the income of their family. Using some of the basic geographic locators that are available on the T1 family file, we can indicate where the person lived. So we can see if they've, for example, made large moves or moves of province. And then finally, there is some information available historically on family composition from the T1 information as well. So, of course, your marital status, some characteristics of your family are included in this as well.
Or it's
not for the whole sample. The matching is it's a complicated question because there's two dimensions to it. Let me describe it. Okay. First of all, we're able to find tax data for probably more than 90% of our sample. Okay. So that's sort of our baseline. So there's a small percentage of our sample for whom we cannot find their information. And in the historical administrative data component, we don't make the effort to impute anything for these individuals. We feel that, this is kind of the cutting edge, and we'll present the data as we find it, and without imputation. As you go back in time, of course, you see that people sort of fall out of scope, right? So you have people that they get younger and they kind of de-age out of the sample because you go back far enough and they're not a tax filer anymore. Or other people, if you go back far enough, you won't see them before they immigrated, for example. So as you go further and further back in time, that coverage declines. The coverage will also decline as you go back in time for other reasons, such as maybe people not filing every year, or some people's SIN numbers do change over time, which is the key that we use to follow people over time. So of course, the coverage is less than 100%. But for most purposes, I think if you sort of set up your project in such a way that you're with sort of a reasonable coverage restriction, I would say. Like if you're saying, okay, my study will analyze people of age 18 or greater in the year, that kind of thing. You can develop good balanced panels of fairly substantial size with this data.
Did they have to agree? And did some not agree?
No, so that's a good question, because the policy at Statistics Canada is we inform respondents of what we are doing. So we make it clear in the questionnaire, and then again through the materials that we disseminate before, during, and after the survey that this is something that we're going to be doing, and respondents have the option of refusing or opting out. And when it's explained to them in that way, or when it's presented in that way, there's very few that don't agree. So essentially, that's not that big of a problem. Les autres questions sur le TNFF? No? The second administrative data component, I mentioned there were 3 right now. The second one is very similar to the T1 family file, except in this case, we linked up the T4s. So ça, c'est le T4. That's the slip that employees will receive every year that feeds into their tax system. And the advantage of using the T4 as well as the T1 is that the T1 takes people's earnings and groups it together into one category. So if I have 2 jobs on the T1, they'll be represented as one gross earnings amount, whereas there will be 2 T4s available separately. The second thing that the T4 slip is good for is that you can follow a person's tenure with a particular employer, and you can see when they change employers over time. Est-ce que vous avez une question?
Des données sur les domaines d'études, les secteurs d'emploi, education fields, sur les...
Le secteur de l'emploi, comme l'industrie?
Yeah, like health education.
Bon, le secteur de l'emploi.
As to compare income among this sector.
Oui, je comprends. Ça serait une bonne addition de cette base de données. Maintenant, le T4 ne comprend pas l'industrie de l'emploi. Mais c'est possible à ajouter l'industrie de l'emploi en utilisant une autre base de données administrative. Et maintenant, nous sommes en train de préparer les approbations nécessaires de suivre cette morceau d'information. Alors, probablement, pendant les prochaines 1 an, j'espère, peut-être 2 ans, mais probablement avant la 2e vague, nous allons ajouter l'industrie de l'emploi de cette base de données ici. Mais aussi, l'industrie de l'emploi est aussi disponible dans l'entrevue. Alors, dans le questionnaire component, il y a une industrie d'emploi ici aussi. Est-ce que ça a été votre question sur l'industrie de l'emploi?
Des fois, si on compare, on analyse les revenus, encore faut-il comparer dans quel domaine la personne travaille.
Ouais.
Parce que moi, ce qui m'intéresse, c'est de comparer les individus selon le secteur, sont des femmes, sont des hommes, jeunes, médecins, enseignants, etc. I have another question.
Yes.
Avez-vous des questions sur la manière dont les individus trouvent un emploi, the way in which people access to job?
OK, oui.
Like social network, contact.
Ouais, ça c'est une bonne question. La question est de... Dans la 2e vague, nous avons quelques questions sur comment on a trouvé leur emploi, si l'emploi a commencé pendant les dernières 2 ans. Alors, je ne sais pas s'il y aura beaucoup de répondants, probablement quelques centaines de répondants vont répondre à cette question dans la 2e vague, mais cette question sera ajoutée dans toutes les vagues dans l'avenir, et probablement après 2 vagues ou 3 vagues supplémentaires, on va avoir beaucoup de répondants qui ont donné cette morceau d'information. Mais dans la première vague, malheureusement, non. Oui, non, c'est une bonne question, mais malheureusement, ce n'était pas la vision de PIAAC n'était pas de comprendre comment on a accédé leur emploi actuel. It had other things that it wanted to do. But I see that as being, but définitivement, il y a des questions sur le deuxième bac. Oui. Okay, the T4, I think I said everything I wanted to say here. Useful for preparing longitudinal job spells, for example, with historical data. And these data are available starting in 2000. So I mentioned the T1 data was from 1982. These ones are more limited in that respect. They're available from 2000. The third one requires a little extra explaining, but je pense que ça vaut la peine, mais sur l'autre côté, c'est un peu spécifique. But it's an administrative file on pension plans in Canada. And what the Pension Plans in Canada file adds to the database is it adds for our respondents whether or not they received a pension plan and whether or not the pension plan was defined benefit or defined contribution. So for our client who's very interested in transitions to retirement, it's an extremely important piece of information. And this replaces the need to ask that question of respondents, which is good because respondents often don't know the answer. It's been shown in research using other Statistics Canada surveys that respondents often don't know whether they have a defined benefit or a defined contribution plan. They'll claim to have a defined benefit plan where none is available at their employer. So it's good to have high-quality administrative data on that. And as well, the fact that it's available from 2000 allows you to see pension plan coverage longitudinally as well, which I think is a pretty unique contribution to this data. I'm not aware of any other longitudinal data that does this. Okay, so that's the package of historical administrative data that's being offered. Yes?
What's known about the employer and the
like
pension?
Overall, in terms of the pension? So what do we have available on Lisa?
Private, public sector, for example.
Oh, okay.
We know that,
Okay. We know, okay, the private public sector, I'll go through the different, and I'll start with that one because you mentioned it. Private public sector is not on the version that's in the RDCs right now, but we're working on adding it. So when we update Lisa, we hope to update it maybe in November, Lisa Wave 1. We need to fix up a couple of pieces of documentation and some other things. We're going to be adding a variable that indicates whether the person's current employer is private or public. I'd have to look back to the pension plan information to see if on the pension plan file itself, if there's a variable that indicates whether it's a public or private employer. I'm inclined to think that there is, but I'm not 100% sure. As for other types of information about the employer, we know the kinds of pieces of information that would normally be collected through a labor force survey. So the size, which would be a self-reported size, the industry of the employer, maybe not too much else, whether it's multi-location. And there are a couple of things that can be pulled out of a pension plan.
The job is covered by a collective bargaining agreement.
Okay, unfortunately, union status was missing from the first wave. We've added it to the second. So that's something that it wasn't part of the international PIAAC survey, and I think it's because maybe differences internationally, it's not common to ask union status in other countries. I'm only guessing at that. So we don't have that for the first cycle.
Contributions to registered
yes.
retirement saving plans? Is that to be included as well?
Yeah, so contributions as well as your, both contributions, so the pension adjustment number is also available. So I've tried to sort of describe one dimension, which is the content dimension. Now I'm going to and I've also given you some sort of a hint about what the other dimension is in terms of the respondent dimension. But I'll go into the respondent dimension a little bit more detail because it'll give you a sense of what's available for whom. So, and of course, this is just wave 1. As we develop into wave 2, some of this will change because some of the people, like in wave 2, there's no longer any distinction between a PIAAC respondent and another respondent. In wave 2 onward, everybody's just a respondent. Everybody gets the same stuff. But right now, LISA includes 4 different types of sample members. So I mentioned already the PIAAC respondent. That's the 8,600 some odd respondents who were selected and respond to the questionnaire and PIAAC components. And there's a second type of respondent, which is their cohabitants. They responded to the questionnaire component only. As an aside, because I think we're on time here, and I'll just spend a little bit of time talking a little bit more about this. As an aside, the PIAAC was only intended to be administered to people between the ages of 16 and 65. So the original PIAAC sample didn't include any families that had only people that were aged 66 and over in it. But we added those in. So we have a full coverage of a representative of Canadian families. And the people who are in that additional sample to cover off seniors' households would be considered here other respondents, and they received the short questionnaire. Yes. And I'll come back to that point. So then we have a third type of sample member who's a non-responding children. Okay, so these are members of our sample. They're just age 0 to 14 at the time of interview and were not interviewed. And
vont être inclus dans l'enquête dans des vagues successives ultérieures au moment où ils atteignent l'âge, c'est ça?
Oui, ils ont suivi. Et aussi, quand ils obtiennent l'âge de 15, ils vont être interviewés aussi. Then we have the people I mentioned, these enumerated non-respondents who are adults that were living in a house with at least one respondent, but we weren't able to interview them for whatever reason. Some of them refused to be interviewed, others just were never able to connect with. So the 4 different kinds of LISA sample members. And that's important to understand when approaching the data, because we tried our best to not make this too complicated. And maybe in the end, it's inevitable that a survey like this would be presented in a format that's somewhat complicated. But we did our best, and what we did was we grouped all 4 types of respondents together in one master file. So basically, if you think of a giant rectangular file of all the questionnaire information, all 4 kinds of our respondents are represented in that. And there's just basically fields of missing for those who, for example, weren't interviewed. So fairly easy to deal with from a computer perspective, and also, I think, easier to deal with conceptually compared to, say, a relational database of many components.
Children, when you say household, it can be multi-family household?
Yeah, so yeah, of course, a household can have, and sometimes I'm a little lazy when I use the word household and family. Yeah, it's set up the same way as SLID was. So a household can be divided into economic families, and economic families can be divided into census families. And then there's also the distinction, which is sometimes made between a family and an unattached individual.
Basically, the child.
Yes, we know
which would be the child's
exactly.
father or mother in
yes.
the multi.
Yeah, and that's the
family household.
Yeah. So we know all those close relationships. OK, voici un tableau qui représente l'échantillon final. La prochaine diapositive est en français. I didn't want to make it bilingual, would have really been too much. Mais voici notre 32,000 respondents, and this is how they split up among the different kinds of respondents. So I mentioned 8,600 PIAAC respondents, 15,000 plus other respondents, 5,000 children, and about 3,000 enumerated non-respondents. So, and then you can go across the other dimension and see those 5 different components. So this will help you to understand what kinds of data you'll have available when you go to look for information. So for example, a respondent, a PIAAC respondent, or another respondent will have the questionnaire component. Only the PIAAC respondent will have the PIAAC component. I think that makes sense. All kinds of respondents will have the 2011 income component. Remember I said that for a case where you have an enumerated non-respondent, that person's income component will be imputed. Okay? And then the historical administrative data component is available for our respondents, our PIAAC and our other respondents. Okay, so this is sort of the idea that you'll see, empty space in the data, and it's normal. Voici le même tableau en français. Bon, la pondération. So we have different kinds of samples, and researchers will probably want to use them in different ways. We've provided 3 weights, which we think will cover the majority of cases that will be needed by researchers, but likely there are others. But we'll provide these 3 for wave 1. First of all, there's a PIAAC responding person weight. So this weight will weight up to represent the population 16 to 65. So researchers who want to look at longitudinal data on only the PIAAC respondent, so these are probably researchers who are mostly interested in somehow using those skills assessments that I talked about, they would use the PIAAC responding person weight. We also have a separate responding person weight, and that's for any of the 23,000 respondents. So grouping together the PIAAC respondents and those that we called other respondents. If you wanted to look at, say, a piece of information like something off the questionnaire, for example, for which you have information for both of these groups together, then you would use that weight. You can see we didn't provide a separate weight for this row here because all the information that you have for these individuals, you also have for these individuals. And so we would expect that all researchers would group both of these categories together, so you have a weight that is useful for when you're analyzing those 2 categories of respondents. That weight would probably also be used if you wanted to do work with the linked historical administrative data. And then finally, we have an enumerated person weight. And the enumerated person weight provides a weight for everybody, whether they were a respondent or not. And for those of you who are familiar with using SLID, SLID, for example, had a responding person weight and an enumerated person weight. And most people, I think, with SLID use the enumerated person weight, by and large, when they were doing studies on, say, low income. Because low income is something that's a family-level variable. We can define it for all members of our sample. And so you would use an enumerated person weight for that. So, for example, if you were looking at anything around the 2011 revenue or the family revenue, like family income, you would probably use the enumerated person weight. And there might be other cases where you'd want to use the enumerated person weight as well, depending on your question and the type of sample that you draw from this panel survey. Est-ce qu'il y a des questions sur la pondération? No? As we go on in time, this is only going to get more complicated because this is effectively LISA Wave 1 is a cross-sectional survey. In Wave 2, there's a whole other set of weights that come into being to deal with the longitudinal aspect of things. So you need panel weights and other things. So we'll be back, I suspect, to explain the longitudinal weights at another time. But suffice it to say that for Wave 1, for the time being, so these are the 3 weights. Okay.
Excuse me, Andrew, but for the income T1, there's no restriction. It's going to be the raw data
That's right.
We're getting.
Yeah. Yeah. So for 2011, there are some 85 or 90 variables that are included in the file. So all components of your market income, all components of your government transfers, and all components of your taxes are included. Dividends, interest, yeah. And on the and then we have kind of cherry picked various deductions. So anything related to a disability deduction, a child deduction, an education deduction, childcare deduction, we include them all. So and some of these things are available then aggregated to the family as well. So for the 2011 variable, or for the 2011 income data, as I said, some 80, 85 variables, maybe 90. As you go back in time towards 1982, the data availability, like the number of variables that are available to us, becomes more sparse. And that's just because less was provided. Going back into the 1980s, we're into the mainframe era of computing, right? So it wasn't the richness of variables available to us. But we kept concepts comparable over time. And I think back in 1982, we might have 35 or 40 variables, mostly on the income, transfers, and taxes side, not so much on the deduction side.
And is it feasible that you could pick out separated or divorced households going backwards?
I would think so. I think that it'd be a good idea to convince yourself that you're okay with what's going on in terms of the family dynamics as you go back in time. I know that that in each we drew for each year the marital status off of the tax file. So if somebody goes from, say, married to married, you might miss a transition, unless there was a period of not married for a year in between the two observations. Adding to that, though, in Wave 2, we have incorporated a biography module on people's marriages and cohabitation. So the 2012 version, which is now available in 2014, comes as a package of 55 related databases. So I said we tried to keep it as simple as possible, but when we add in all of these administrative data, we thought that this was the easiest way to do it. And so I'll explain to you what's in these 55 different databases. The main database is the questionnaire file. This is the giant rectangular file of all of the information from the first 4 components plus the survey weights. So when I went through those 5 different components, the first 4 of them are all represented in the questionnaire file. And they're represented at the individual level. So every respondent, including children, have a line on this file. And all of their pieces of information are attached to that. Okay, so it's a giant rectangular file. The survey weights are included in that as well. And then there's 54 administrative data files. So each of the years, 82 to 2011 from the T1 family file, each of the years from 2000 to 2011 are represented as a separate rectangular data file. So for researchers that want to build a panel using questionnaire and administrative data, they'll need to become familiar with the linking keys that link across persons, and in some cases across jobs, for example. And we back in Ottawa, we've been working on some, I have a draft of it. We'll give it to you as soon as we're happy with it. But it's a document that'll provide you with some hints, I guess, or some sample code that you could use to inform yourself about how we would group this data together, although probably you'll figure out ways that work better for you anyways. But I guess the idea here is that I've worked with this kind of data in the past. I felt that this would probably be the best way of doing it, because everybody who's approaching this data is going to approach it differently. So we'll try to represent it to you in as simple a way as possible and allow you to group it together as however you want. So
I'm sure the answer is yes, but you can identify retirement income from if it's pension.
Yeah.
Income.
Yeah. There's a variable called private pension income.
Right.
Yeah, and that's on there. And also your RRS, if you're receiving RRSP income, that would be included there as well.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, I've seen studies where people have looked at those very variables and shown massive transitions to retirement at the age 65 using that data. Des autres questions? Okay, so the documentation, there's 55 files. There's lots of documentation available as well. We have data dictionaries for each of these files. It's not as daunting as it seems. Once you once you look at it, you realize that the 30 data dictionaries for the T1 family file, they're all the same. Right? So it's not like there's really 30 separate data dictionaries, but there are, because each year may have some different variables in it. And also the data dictionaries include variable means and that kind of thing, which will vary from year to year. We've also, rather than going straight to providing a user guide, which is usually a lengthy document which describes the data, but as well as the methodology and the collection procedures and everything that you'd want to know about the data. Usually they're 80, 100 pages. We've provided a quick start guide, which is about 24, 25 pages, and gets right into, okay, this is how the data is structured. It follows a lot the format of this presentation, but it also gives you some information on what are the linking keys, the identifiers, and how you would link from database to database, as well as some intuition about how certain variables are named and how they're constructed. These are available. The Quick Start Guide, of course, is always in non-confidential format, so it can be shared outside of the RDCs. The user guide I'm not sure about yet because we haven't finished it, but the data dictionaries are available both in confidential format, which you can use in the RDCs, so they have all of the average values and all of the mins and the maxes and everything included. But they're also available in non-confidential formats. So all of those numbers, the variable names are there, but the numbers have been wiped clean. And so those can be, I think that we sent them out with the package of data. They might be available here, but if they're not, then we can make them available to you here. Or else you can email me at the address I give later, and we have a package that we can send out to you. So I promised to talk a little bit about Wave 2. Wave 2 sont sur le terrain maintenant. Nous avons environ mi-fini la période de collecte. Notre taux de réponse est acceptable. Et nous continuons avec ça. Avec cette présentation d'aujourd'hui, j'ai voulu donner l'impression que la première vague est un peu différente que l'avenir. Parce que la première vague a compris le test de PIAAC. Mais pour l'avenir, nous n'avons pas la même constraint. Pour ça, nous pouvons changer le questionnaire et développer notre connaissance sur notre répondant. Pour la vague 2, nous avons plusieurs de nouveaux sujets qui sont couverts. For example, we have c'est la deuxième vague d'une enquête longitudinale. Alors, c'est le temps de commencer à collecter beaucoup d'informations sur les transitions famille, les transitions de travail, les transitions sur l'éducation, les transitions sur l'apprentissage, et tous les types de transitions sont collectés dans la deuxième vague. Mais aussi, il y a plusieurs d'autres domaines de contenu intéressants. Nous avons un bon module sur la retraite qui comprend beaucoup de questions sur la préparation de la collecte, de la retraite, mais aussi sur la période après la retraite pour eux qui sont déjà en retraite. Questions on caregiving. Nous avons utilisé le questionnaire sur l'incapacité qui a été utilisé par le Canadian Survey of Disability. Alors, c'est un très avancé groupe de questions pour identifier qui sont disabled, qui sont sur les conditions d'incapacité. Some questions on health. We have we use the mental health module known as the, hope I'm getting this right, I think it's the Kessler 10. Also, some questions on child health using a child health screener, because we believe that child health is important for the functioning of the family, the parents' labor market attachment. Some questions on the so-called Big Five series of indicators. I think it's the first StatCan survey to ever use the Big Five. Big Five is 5 different personality domains, which can be used along with other types of cognitive skills for understanding differences, say, in wages. Like your personality comprises things like how outgoing you are, and or how shy you are on the other side, or how much you're willing to take risks, or how much you don't like risks. And these factors could be just as important as things that we measured in the PIAAC assessment in terms of your skills. These are sometimes called in the literature non-cognitive skills. And so we've included that in Wave 2. A fairly standard short module on life satisfaction for those who are interested in that sort of research. And some other things that aren't included here. I mentioned already in the some biography category, we have some questions, modules on marital histories, various other things. Oh yeah, and I should also mention too, this summer, around August, we'll be starting a consultation for Wave 3 for LISA. That'll be the content for Wave 3 of LISA. And we'll be inviting suggestions, commentary on what people have seen up to now in terms of Wave 1 and Wave 2 and where they'd like to see it going for Wave 3 in terms of content areas. Because again, even though Wave 2 is full, there are some things like biography elements, for example, that we don't have to ask again. So more survey time frees up. It's kind of an advantage of longitudinal surveys as an aside. As you go, you can add more and more content. You can develop a better understanding of your respondents than you ever could in a cross-sectional survey.
As to where the focus would be for Wave 3? Or?
I do. There's some discussion about trying to get a sense of people's assets and their debts. A little bit of sense on that. Now, I don't think we can go into the depth of detail that's available on the Survey of Financial Security, a big asset and debt survey. But that's one of the things that the client has asked us to look into. Other things related to the family, for example, potentially questions on, trying to remember what the term is, rather than trying to explain it, I'll use the term. Family functioning. There were indices of family functioning that were available on the NLSCY, and ESDC is interested in seeing those things as well on LISA. So that's a couple of things that come to my mind.
Les âgés vont quitter à un moment donné des ménages privés pour passer dans les ménages collectifs. Qu'est-ce qui arrive à ce moment-là avec ces personnes-là? Oui,
l'intention est de les suivre, mais c'est parfois difficile à faire. Ça va dépendre le déroulement de notre enquête. On va voir dans l'avenir si c'est possible à les avoir dans une, assez de répondants dans cette catégorie-là de faire la recherche. Mais l'intention est de les suivre. We are trying to follow them. Even now we are trying to follow them in Wave 2. Yeah. I don't know how. We'll find out with the results of collection if we lose a lot of people that way. C'est une enquête volontaire. Hein? Et parfois, quand on change leur vie dans un grand sens comme ça, et aussi, peut-être il y a une raison pour laquelle les personnes, faire un changement comme ça. Peut-être ils vont moins capables à répondre à la questionnaire aussi. We will, for respondents, if we get that answer, like you can imagine a situation where the interviewer is speaking to a relative, and they find out that person has moved into a retirement home and is no longer available to be interviewed. That is recorded. So we know when people fall out of our sample because of that. Et c'est pas toujours possible à les suivre.
Quel est l'horizon temporel, le time frame de l'enquête? Oui. Est-ce qu'on sait déjà qu'il va y avoir au moins 10 vagues?
On ne sait pas. C'est difficile à dire. Il y aura définitivement une vague 3. Je peux dire ça avec confiance. Et l'intention est contraire à une enquête comme l'EDTR, SLID, il n'y a pas une date d'expiry. L'idée pour SLID était d'avoir un panel de 6 ans seulement. Et après ça, mais pour LISA, l'intention est d'avoir un panel indéfini. Mais, what's indefinite? Pour maintenant, nous allons avoir une vague 3 et après ça, j'espère qu'il y aura un vrai cadre aussi. And who uses it? S'il y a beaucoup de recherches intéressantes qui viennent de l'ISA ELIA, ce serait un bon avantage pour avoir une continuation de cette enquête.
And for the people who from Wave 2 do not want to participate, there's no way to get to their administrative files, or is that still a possibility? Legally, do you have to ask them every wave? If you reach them, if you don't agree? You know,
I see what you're getting at.
Yeah.
I think I'll have to look into that. I'm not actually sure of the answer to that question. I think that that there is some point at which you cannot, continue.
Going to retirement homes, in some sense, it should be there in their tax files somewhere. Some kind of deduction or some kind of.
Yep, that's a good point, and that would be the kind of point you would use to say, well, this is why we want to continue to follow them. I think it would have to be a politic, like a policy that we'd have to look at for the survey. I know that in the case of SLID, they would follow people for a time, even when they were not getting interviews from them. So there is some precedence to doing that. So we'll look into it. And the other thing that we're going to try and do is people that don't want to participate in Wave 2, we'll go back to them in Wave 3 and see if they want to change their mind. That's a second approach to doing this, sort of the same thing. Not exactly the same thing.
And you also update the administrative files will be updated.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So one thing that's happening right now is in 2014, we're picking up all kinds of new respondents. So we're picking up respondents who are now cohabiting with our old respondents, and we're picking up some of those 2,600 odd people that didn't want to participate the first time. They're now participating. So their administrative data would be added in as well for the use. Mm-hmm.
Je me demande, pour la vague 3, l'information pour la vague 2, l'information qui est collectée par rapport aux compétences, est-ce que c'est les mêmes qui sont collectées dans la vague 1 pour les répondants du PIAAC? C'est-à-dire, est-ce qu'on va pouvoir recalculer encore les compétences en littératie, en calcul, puis en résolution de problèmes? Ou vous avez parce que le fardeau est quand même lourd, là. Vous avez mentionné que c'est 2 heures de temps pour...
Oui, ça c'est le problème, le fardeau est très grand. Aussi, nous avons utilisé les ressources de OECD pour préparer les scores pour le PIAAC aussi. Et ce serait probablement presque impossible à répéter le même processus ici. Now, what we have in Wave 2 for skills is we have a new set of questions that we haven't tried in a large-scale survey before. They're based, broadly speaking, on the way skills are measured in the ONET classification. And it was Chris Robinson and some other professors at Western University that helped us with this particular set of skills. Some people sometimes also ask, is there a plan of ever redoing the PIAAC assessment with these same respondents? It's kind of the same question that you asked, a little bit differently. Right now, there are no plans to do that. PIAAC, I think, is negotiating right now to do another PIAAC in 2016-17. So it's possible that we could get drawn in on that, but it's not guaranteed, and I haven't entered into any discussions on that yet, but it could be possible. Mm-hmm.
Do you remember what's included in the training component?
Yeah, the training component is it's not as big as some of the training components that have been in other surveys. What this training component does is it's trying to think now exactly. The way the training component works on this is well, it basically, I'm just trying, rather than describe how it works, because that's the way I'm thinking. I'm trying to describe it in terms of what kinds of measures you'll get. So it measures formal training done at the workplace, but it also takes measures of informal training as well. So when a person is identified as being involved in formal training, like classroom training, computer-based training, that kind of thing that's offered through the workplace, they will get some extra questions on that. How long it was, I think there's a question on the cost, that kind of thing. Whether or not they think it's, was worthwhile, whether it improved their skills in a meaningful way. But also we pick up markers of informal training. So this being, I learned how to do my job from my supervisor, or I learned by doing, or I did some self-study. These kinds of things, we pick up markers on that as well. S'il y a des autres questions sur le contenu de vague 2? Des questions sur le réseau? Non?
Les possibilités d'analyse comparative avec ELIA ou Understanding Society ou German.
Oui.
Est-ce qu'il y a un document qui expose un peu les points communs aux différentes enquêtes?
Non, il n'y a pas un document maintenant. Toutes les enquêtes internationales comme HILDA et GSOP fonctionnent un peu différent que les autres. Il y a quelques similarités. Par exemple, il y a quelques similarités entre HILDA et GSOP, mais il y a beaucoup de différences aussi. Et le LISA est le même dans cette idée-là. Il y a quelques similarités entre HILDA, quelques similarités entre GSOP, et beaucoup de différences aussi. Alors, par exemple, les autres enquêtes n'ont pas des grandes bases de données administratives. C'est ni les évaluations de compétences. Alors, voici deux grandes différences là. Mais pour quelques autres domaines, par exemple la santé, le Big Five, quelques éléments de biographie, the life satisfaction, les mesures dans ELIA sont presque les mêmes que les mesures dans HILDA ou GSOP. Probablement, ça vaut la peine de préparer un document qui compare les similarités et les différences. Et quelqu'un qui veut utiliser ELIA ou LISA pour faire les comparaisons comme ça, pourrait utiliser le Cross-National Equivalent File qui est disponible, je pense que c'est disponible ici au le réseau ici. Si c'est pas disponible, il faut simplement facilement préparer une application au CNEF. Et aussi, je pense que c'est aussi possible d'aller chercher le HILDA et le GSOP directement aussi. Malheureusement, le LISA sera disponible seulement à le réseau. Oui?
About the disability and child health information, could you identify a mother we have children with disability, and what kind of information about the disability do you have?
Okay, so there are two ways that we measure, well, the way that we measure disability is using the disability screening questionnaire, which is a 30-some-odd set item, 30 questions on people's disabilities. And so that will be asked of everybody in our sample that's age 15 and over. As far as children's disabilities, we don't have a way of directly identifying children's disabilities. But what we do have is we use something called the Children with Special Healthcare Needs Screener. And the Children with Special Healthcare Needs Screener is a screener that was developed by child health experts in the United States. It's short, and it identifies cases where the children are, for example, receiving more health care than what would be normal for children of their age, or receiving medication for something that would not be normal for children of their age. There's 5 such dimensions like that. And if somebody, you can use these questions then to identify cases in which children are likely to be, have a special health care need. I wouldn't go so far as to say they're disabled, because we just don't, we wouldn't know that. This screener has been used in other studies. to correlate with labor market participation, and it does correlate well. There are follow-up questions if you indicate that your child has one of these special needs. We ask a few questions on whether or not this has impacted your labor market activity, that kind of thing. So it's within that context. Yes. Yeah. So the children and the mother are of course matched together. Yeah. Or the father, or a brother or sister, or anybody else in the family. Yeah. Okay. Je pense que ça c'est la fin. Si vous voulez me contacter, voici mes coordinates. Comme j'ai dit, toute la documentation non confidentielle est disponible. If you send me an email, I'd be happy to send it. Or if you want to talk, you may call me there as well. Yes.
I might as well take a chance and say, what's the status with SLID?
Okay. I can fill you in on that. So SLID stopped collection for the 2011 reference year. And it's been, yeah, that would have been released last summer. Well, it stopped, let me think now. Let me make sure I get my numbers right. 2000, okay, so I think the last longitudinal year for SLID was 2010. The 2011 data was processed cross-sectionally, even though it was collected within the SLID framework. For 2012 reference year, the SLID has been replaced with a cross-sectional income survey, which for those of you who remember the SCF, is a lot like the SCF. It's an LFS supplement, and it includes administrative data like ELIA and SLID does. But otherwise, it's quite a bit like the old SCF.
No, say you want to make, do you think it's feasible to use the SLID with this new survey to have some kind of repeated cross-section?
Yes, that's the intention.
Okay. So it's built in.
Yes.
The new survey, so that.
Yeah. So in some ways, from the perspective of analyzing income data in a time series way, not a longitudinal way, but in a time series cross-sectional way, there are some advantages to the new model. Being attached to the LFS, the response rate is much higher. But there's still risk of some interruptions in the series due to the change in design. It's moving from a longitudinal survey with certain properties, now moving to a cross-sectional survey with other properties. So they're working on the time series elements of it right now and trying to minimize those transitions.
Should come out.
I would think late summer.
Late summer.
Yeah, usually that's
for 2012.
For 2012, I think that's when I don't believe a dissemination date has been established, but that's usually around when the income data comes out.
And are they going to use administrative data there as well for income?
Yeah.
In that new data set?
That's right. Yeah. So that's the same as what SLID has been doing for a long time. Yeah. So the source of income data will be the same.
I guess I was surprised at the difference in sample size between SLID and ELIA. So do you think this will restrict the type of research questions that will be able to be?
Well, I think that obviously some research questions are going to be a function of the sample size. That's always the case, and it's also been the case with SLID. There were types of analysis that you couldn't do with SLID either, and this will not help with that. People have been frustrated in the past with SLID and small samples of recent immigrants, for example, and so researchers, looking towards that thing would need to look to other data sets, and that will continue to be the case here. The objective with this survey, although, well, first of all, the funding around this survey is entirely different from how SLID was funded. And so this survey is the work for this survey started long before SLID was even taken off the shelf. And so this survey was never intended to be a replacement for SLID. This survey was intended to be smaller in size, but bigger in breadth in terms of information. SLID was very good at labor market, but it was weak on most other dimensions because it focused labor market and income. But it was weak on most other dimensions because it didn't ask questions on health or family or caregiving or whatever else we have added here. So I guess to say that you know, LISA will have some advantages over SLID, but it also, there would be some things that you cannot do with LISA that you used to be able to do with SLID.
So, for example, there won't be any individual panel level data, or you have to construct it yourself. Because in SLID, you know, if you wanted a person file,
yeah,
you just had to click person file, and you had the person.
You mean the SLID-RET functionality? Yeah, you know, even this, like the SLID-RET functionality is pretty nice. You know, you can prepare your data sets with a GUI, you know, a graphical user interface that, you know, so there's some point and click, and there you go, your data is right the way it is. We don't have that yet with this, but it's not clear that we ever will. Like the advantage of SLID and a GUI was that SLID was always the same content over and over and over again, so you could design the interface and it would never have to change.
But you wouldn't have person level.
In LISA, yeah, we have.
Oh, you have person level.
Yeah, that's what I call the respondent weight. Yeah, yeah.
At the household level.
No, so that's a person level.
level.
In fact, all of our weights are person level.
Okay.
We don't have the opposite. We don't have a household level weight. You know, there's no such thing as a longitudinal household. So we only have person level weights. So from the perspective of job dynamics, key difference between LISA and SLID, and I'm speaking of LISA Wave 2 because LISA Wave 1 was effectively a cross-sectional. SLID, you could look at individual job spells, every single individual job spell that a person had, and there's detail available on every single job spell. We have continuous employment spells. So if a person works 2 jobs within a particular employment spell, they're not distinguished from one another. So we ask people when did they start working and when did they stop working, and we ask general things about that period of time, but we don't get into particular jobs. So it's a little bit different, but we feel that that's appropriate because of the, see, SLID had a granularity that was fairly detailed, like it's kind of monthly. You could get information on month, like right down to the month. LISA is probably going to be more of an annual kind of thing, like you can compare 1 year of information to the next year of information rather than a month-to-month kind of thing, although some of that information will be available.
Are there questions at McGill ou à Québec? Ça semble pas être le cas. You may have mentioned that already, but PIAAC, how many countries did participate, and how will the data be available, like the Canadian data as part of the big PIAAC?
Okay, so PIAAC, I think, had 26 participating countries, and PIAAC will be available to researchers in 2 ways. The first way is through public use microdata file, which is available through the OECD website. And I believe I don't even think there's any restrictions for downloading it. I think it's really widely available. And so the scores and the questionnaire information is available for all of the countries. For those, and that's, you know, obviously a highly confidentialized, if that's a word, piece of data. For those who want, and that would include for Canada, I believe somewhere on the order of 10,000 Canadian respondents. But I said earlier that PIAAC had about 26,000 respondents. So if you wanted to do research with the 26,000 respondents, then that's the second way of getting data, which is here. And that data would be, and so that data comprises all of the oversamples I talked about. There was an Aboriginal person's oversample and an immigrant oversample, some provincial oversamples, and I'm trying to think of the Quebec oversample. There's like a Francophone oversample, which ends up kind of being a Quebec oversample for obvious reasons. And then I think that's all. I think in BC they had an oversample of younger adults. So that information would be available through the Research Data Center Network. Isn't it? I don't know. I'm honestly not sure. I believe.
Je pense que oui.
The international data was released in November, so it could be that there's been a delay between the two. If it's not available now, I imagine it would be coming down the pipe fairly soon.
S'il n'y a pas d'autres questions, on va rester à remercier Andrew Heisz.
Yeah.
Merci à nos participants à Québec et à McGill. Et ben, on se revoit pour les autres vagues, peut-être même pour des séances de formation à l'utilisation des données comme telles éventuellement. Donc, merci à tous et bon été.